If a film set in the 1980s about cannibalism and coming of age sounds like something that you would be interested in, and you haven't seen Luca Guadagnino's 2022 horror/romance Bones and All, then stop watching! Bookmark this, pop it in the watch later, and then come back once you've seen it. Because I implore you to go into this film as blind as possible. That's what I did, and it was such a good decision. I don't go into many movies totally blind these days, especially not horror movies, because I am very easily scared and I like to know what I'm getting myself into. In the case of Bones and All, the movie was recommended to me, and for some reason I just sort of started watching it, like, without my usual Google deep dive. And also, if it sounds like something you wouldn't be into, you're also welcome to leave. You just don't have to do the part where you come back. If you are my grandma, who I know occasionally watches my channel, I love you, but this really doesn't seem like it's going to be your thing. So go on. Alright, now we're left with the people who have seen the movie, and welcome back to the people who hadn't. Bones and All was first released to the world in 2015 as a book by ironically vegan Camille DeAngelis, which I think I'm saying that right. The book differs in a few ways, especially towards the end, but the bare bones are the same. The story centres Marin, a teenage girl played by Taylor Russell, and Lee, a teenage boy played by Timothée Chalamet. The movie opens on an oil painting. Several, actually. And the most moving, plucky strings you have ever heard in your life. The music in this film is so evocative. Good job to Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who said they had extensive discussions with the film's director on how the score should sit in the film. Guadagnino said he wanted the music to sound like an unending longing, and oh boy it does! These oil paintings are my favourite genre of incredibly specific art, which is landscapes with pylons. I just love it. I know there's probably some symbolism in man-made structures surrounded by nature, but it's also just, I love how they look. I love the feeling it gives me. The shot transitions to all the paintings hung up on display in a high school hallway, and it's the end of the day. Everybody's leaving, but we go to the empty auditorium where our main girl is playing piano on the stage. Her friend, Sherry, walks in and says, "I didn't know you played piano." She invites Marin to a sleepover that evening, and Marin says, "My dad wouldn't let me." And Sherry says, "Well, sneak out then," and gives her directions to her house. This opening 8-ish minutes is so beautiful. Marin's dad lets her drive the car home from school, they pick up groceries, and she gets ready for bed. It's very innocent, very domestic. Remember when I said I had no idea what was coming? So I was taking this whole sequence as it was presented to me, as the very normal life of a 17-year-old who recently moved to a new school. Marin waits for her dad to fall asleep, and then climbs out of her bedroom window and follows the power lines just like Sherry said. She taps on the glass door and her friend says, "Oh, she's here," and lets her in and gives her a big hug. As a fellow lonely girl, I feel Marin's like, "Oh, people are excited to have me around" energy, you know? Later, Marin and Kim, one of Sherry's friends, one of the other two girls who are at the sleepover, are lying under a glass coffee table, and the other two girls are on the sofa painting their nails. This top-down shot of Marin and Kim is so, like, soft. It's by lamplight, they're talking in very gentle voices. The subtext is quite romantic. There's very light tones of, like, crush, first love sort of energy, you know? At one point Sherry says, "Let me paint your nails," and Kim is like, "We're trying to talk here." Just very genuinely interested in speaking to Marin. Marin is, like, leaning into Kim's shoulder and, like, inhaling, and it's like, oh, she smells good, huh? We find out that Marin's mum is not in the picture, having left when Marin was very young, and her dad is actually very secretive about her. Sherry's finally like, "Put your damn hand on the table," and paints Kim's nail, and she's like, "That's copper fever." And Kim's like, "It's a bit too orange for me. What do you think, Marin?" And Marin is like staring at this girl's finger, completely intoxicated until, "Oh, she smelled good, huh? When I tell you this caught me all the way off guard." My first thought was actually, oh my god, with the wet nail polish, that has to taste disgusting. Now everybody is screaming, the soft vibes are very much broken, and Maren gets herself the hell out of there. Sherry's actually yelling, Maren, don't! It's like she's a dog. I don't know why I found that funny. It's like, Maren, stop! Maren, get down from there. Maren runs all the way back to her own house and she's banging on the screen door, and her dad wakes up and opens the door and sees her covered in blood and says, you didn't. And we realise that this is not a new occurrence for Maren. And now everything that seemed sweet and innocent in the opener has a brand new context. Maren's dad wouldn't let her go to the sleepover, not because he's just a strict parent, but because she's a danger to others. The way Maren was looking at Kim was not a look of infatuation, but in fact one of a predator looking at prey. Maren's dad is just frantically packing, and Maren sort of stumbles over to the mirror in the hall and stares at herself covered in blood as if she's just in a haze. And then her dad tells her to move, and boom, cut to black, bones and all. Now we've skipped some time. They were in Virginia and now they're in Maryland, and Maren is just waking up in their new place. She calls for her dad, but doesn't find him. What she does find, however, is a tape player, some money, and her birth certificate sitting on the kitchen table. Her father has abandoned her. He can't keep saving her every time she slips up. He can't turn her into the police, but he can't keep protecting her either, especially since she's just turned 18. Maren starts to listen to the tape, which is how she finds out why her dad has run away, but she can't listen to the whole thing at once. It's too much. He says the first time is when you were 3, and she turns it off. Later, Maren is sitting in her room and the lights go out. Probably because there's no one there to pay the electricity bill. She can't stay here, so she takes her birth certificate with her mother's name on it and starts her search. She goes to the bus station, asking the lady at the desk what the cheapest route to Detroit is. There's going to be 3 transfers, so Maren simply asks how to get to Columbus and then she'll take it from there. The lady says, shouldn't you be in school? And Maren says, you'd think, which I love. But I also love how the lady replies, I don't know what that means. The lady asks for a driver's license to prove she's 18, and Maren says, you can see a birth certificate. So she gets on the bus and continues listening to her dad's tape. Her dad tells the story of the first time, when Maren ate her babysitter, Penny. Her dad found them both on the floor, and at first he thought they'd both been murdered, until he realised Maren was just sleeping. Little post-meal nap. He says she still had Penny's ear in her mouth. And her dad says, I remember thanking God she hadn't been wearing any earrings, because you could have choked. This line is so simple, but it so brilliantly conveys the love a father has for his kid. Your 3-year-old has just murdered somebody, but you've got no choice but to protect them, because what else are you going to do? There's no option. You look after your baby, because that's your baby. So he started moving them around and stopped using their real last name. When Maren started school, he hoped that being in public would be enough to restrain her. And he was right, for the most part. But she got clever. At this point, Maren is overwhelmed again and stops the tape. Now it's evening and Maren has reached her first stop in Frederick, Maryland. She's got nowhere to stay, so she beds down on a bench and reads her book, although of course it starts to rain. Pretty soon she realises she's not alone. There's a man standing at the end of the road. He starts to head towards her and tells her he didn't mean to scare her. She asks if he's waiting for the bus and he says, no, I was looking for you. Do I know you? She says. And he replies, I guess not in the way you mean. I guess not in the way you mean.
I guess not in the way you mean.
She starts to walk briskly away, which you would, when he says he smelled her. Interestingly, he also says, I bet you smelled me too. He can tell she hasn't fed in a long time. Many months, he reckons, just by the scent. She's scared by him, of course, but she follows him when he tells her to, only picking up a rock in case she needs to defend herself. He takes her to a house and doesn't really answer when she asks if it's his. He leans down and tells her not to be scared, because Sully's got rules. Number 1 is never eat an eater. Capital E, eater. Listen, I like Sully. I wish he was, I don't know, I wish he wasn't crazy. I wish he wasn't lonely or obsessive, because when we first meet Sully, he seems to care, and I think that he does. He simply wanted to protect his fellow eater. Someone he could tell was inexperienced and alone. A baby eater. Not a baby eater. Well, no. He takes her into the kitchen and takes some Cornish hens from the fridge and starts to prepare them. She says, "I thought I was the only one," and he says, "No, of course not. In fact, I bet you've met a few already, even if you didn't know that's what was happening." He says eaters can be dangerous to each other. Not everyone has the same rules as Sully, and it's safer if they just steer clear of each other. Maren says, "Well, you came looking for me," and he says, "I just thought you might be hungry." She says, "For hens?" And he says, "No." Maren asks him who lives here. He doesn't try to hide it, he just says, "Use your nose." Which she does. She's good at it, she just didn't know she could do it before. I swear to God, this girl looks like a cartoon character floating through the air towards a pie. That is genuinely the visual that popped into my head the first time I watched it. She floats up these stairs. And up there, she finds a woman on the floor. She's not dead, but she's collapsed. Maren's first instinct is to get help, but Sully says no. He says they need to be fed. It's an urge that needs to be satisfied, or else they'll end up doing something they'll regret. Maren can only resist for so long because she's young, but it's gonna get harder. He presents the idea that there are more ethical ways to feed themselves, like in this case. He found the owner of this house close to death. Maybe she had a heart attack. If no one had found her, she would have died anyway, so what's the harm? I love the idea here because it's a very different moral quandary than I would immediately think of. Eaters don't behave like vampires in that they can still eat normal food. So it's not a matter of eat human or starve. However, the urge to eat people is so strong and intoxicating that it can and it will take you over. Like Maren nibbling Kim's finger when she clearly didn't mean to. If you don't feed yourself, the urge will take over and you will end up doing something you regret. It's not eat versus starve, it's eat strangers versus go crazy and accidentally eat someone you love. This is not a part of Maren that she likes, but like Sully says, the urge is going to keep getting stronger. So you either find a way to feed that sits comfortably with your soul, or you run the risk of being a danger to people who are genuinely important to you. Maren asks if she can have a few minutes, and he says sure. When the time comes, she'll smell it. And she does. When that woman finally passes away in the early hours of the morning, Maren wakes up like a goddamn bloodhound, just ping! She leaves her room, and Sully is chowing down, arch game crazy, and she joins him, without even having to think about it. Something I find really interesting about this film is I wouldn't call it gory. Don't get me wrong, it's very bloody. Like, wow, human bodies have a lot of sauce. And there are plenty of up-close shots of people eating people, but it never feels gratuitous. I hate shock value. I think it's cheap, and I always find myself sighing when I feel like something is only there to make me squirm. But I never felt that way while watching this film. Every instance of blood and what little gore there is feels very necessary and very tasteful. Pun fully intended. Also, something about me that I discovered while watching this film is I think I really struggle with anticipation more than anything else. Like, this film was not that hard to watch the first time, but it was really hard the second time around just because I knew what was coming. A really interesting choice here was to not show them eating her, but instead to cut away, just as Maren bites down, to her photographs. Her family pictures on her nightstand, with the noises of them feasting in the background. The movie is reminding you that this was a whole person with a whole life. We're rooting for the wolves because the nature documentary is about them, but the rabbits are living things too. I really do see Maren and Sully as wolves. They hunt. They don't necessarily kill when they don't have to, which I'm not sure applies to wolves, but please stay with me here. They also become very wolf-like when the hunger overtakes them, same as everyone else in this film. No one's cutting anything up with a little knife and fork here. There's no gourmet Hannibal Lecter sit-down brunch. They get close to the ground. This isn't civilized cannibalism. This is animalistic. But it's not like a blind frenzy either, because before they eat Mrs. Harmon, Sully has the forethought to lay down a sheet to make cleanup easier. Never mind take the majority of his clothes off. This is probably just because Sully is older and he regularly feeds himself, so it's not so manic. Afterwards, Marin and Sully are sitting in the kitchen, covered in blood. Oh my god, so much blood. Sully is showing her his ritual, in which he cuts off the hair from the person he ate and adds it to this long-ass braid he started when he was about Marin's age. It's his way of remembering. His way of respecting them. I don't know what he does when he eats someone with a buzz cut. I guess those people are okay to forget. He tells Marin that she doesn't need to be alone. She could stick with him for a while. She says she's looking for someone who he correctly guesses is her mother. She doesn't directly reject his offer, however, after cleaning up, she runs away while he's in the shower. As her bus drives past the house, Sully is standing outside, staring. Oh my god, he looks devastated. It's actually gut-wrenching because you feel really bad. And also kind of scared of him. On the bus, Marin listens to her dad's tape again. He's talking about how she started to get sneaky with it, like when she ate someone at camp when she was 8 years old. He realised that this was who she was. He never questioned if she had a choice, but he did realise he was going to have to start saying no to things, restricting how much she could be out of his sight. This scene makes the sound design jump out to me so hard because Marin's listening to the tape, right? But behind the tape, you can still hear the noise from the bus. Just like if you were actually listening to something with headphones in public. They wouldn't completely block all the noise out. I love that the bus driver's announcement is layered underneath her dad speaking. It's, like, delicious.
They found his pop tent pitched in the heavy woods, all bloody inside. Luke something. Vanderbilt. If they ruled it a homicide, I never heard. Vanderwall or something like that. I watched after to see if you looked sad, and you didn't. That was the beginning of saying no to things.
Marin finally reaches Columbus, where she goes into a convenience store to, like, steal some stuff. A man starts harassing a woman, so she calls him out before Timothy Chalamet gets him out of the store by provoking him to fight. Marin leaves the shop at dusk and smells a little evening snack. She sees Lee leaving an abandoned building, covered in blood. You harass women, you get 8. That's just the way it works. I don't feel bad for this rabbit, this one did crimes. As Lee passes her, he says, he's over there if you want leftovers. She says, hey, you smelled me. I smelled you too. I didn't know I could do that. It's nice that you saved that mum from being harassed. I'm 18, by the way. Lee invites her into the truck he's stealing, and she says, you can't just steal this. And Lee says, everybody's got their rules. That's not one of mine. He reads the guy's driver's license to find his address, and they go to his house. Lee assumes that he doesn't have any family because he doesn't have any pictures in his wallet, which he's right about this time. Marin asks if he'll help her. She's new at this. Lee says no one our age is new at this, and she says, I'm new at remembering it. At all. Implying that she just used to black out when she'd do it before, which makes sense in the case that she never really realised what she was doing. She says she doesn't want to hurt anybody, and Lee says famous last words. But he starts up the engine and off they go. At the guy's house, Lee goes through his records and puts on Look It Up by Kiss. I love this scene because it immediately showcases the different stages that these two people are at. Marin is very stiff. She's still very tense, still emotionally distraught by everything that has happened. This part of herself that she's only just now properly discovering. And then there's Lee, who's been doing this for years, and he's dancing around to the record because it's just a Saturday for him. He had to process all of this stuff at a much younger age. Marin sleeps with a switchblade in hand and dreams of her past. She sees her 18th birthday where her father said, I've been waiting on this day for a long time. Which is a fairly normal thing to say to someone, I guess, but it feels so heavy with context. Was he looking forward to the day she became an adult because it was the day he could finally leave her to fend for herself? It's also unclear whether this is actually something that he said to her or if this is just something that she's dreaming in retrospect, because it's a dream. In the morning, Lee and Maren are off again. They get breakfast at a diner, which the breakfast looks so good, by the way, and Maren tells him about Sully. Just in broad daylight, full voice talking about eating people.
Keeps his braid woven over the hair, people that he eats.
And the only person who notices is this little girl at the table next to them. She keeps staring and Maren like bares her teeth at her, but in sort of like a playful way, like making funny faces at the baby who won't stop staring at you in public. I don't know what the writer's intentions were with this moment, with the little girl being the only one who notices them. Part of me thinks maybe the child is like them, although of course she's too young to realise it yet. And she's subconsciously drawn to them, like they all are to each other. Of course, it could also be that thing of when children are the only ones to notice something that adults seem oblivious to, which is also a trope that I really love. Lee says, I think I might have heard of this guy, referring to Sully, and Maren tells him about the braid of hair. Lee says, that's a choice, which is hilarious. Maren and Lee head to Lee's home state of Kentucky. Lee left when he was 17, but his little sister, Kayla, still lives there, and he comes back because he loves her. Kayla doesn't know about him, so she doesn't understand why he comes and goes like he does. They stay at his aunt's house, who is no longer with us, but no one can know that they are there. Kayla barges in later and says, "You're leaving already?" He promises he'll never disappear like their dad did, but that he can't stay. Kayla storms off, and Lee says they should probably leave early because she's going to tell his mum. She does lash out and call him the F-slur, and although it's the 80s, it is a bit of a jump scare, so there's your warning. If you didn't listen when I told you to go watch the movie the first time. Lee seems shaken up by her anger, but he can't be mad at her because she just wants him around. Lee and Maren go to a slaughterhouse where Lee works in the summers. They take the money out of the cash register in the cafeteria and then they sit in the slaughterhouse. Maren muses about how all the cows have a life, a family, a language, says Lee. Maren reveals why she wants to go to Minnesota, to find her mum, and Lee says he'll take her. They'll make it a road trip. See the country.
Well, Missouri and Iowa, anyway.
Missouri and Iowa, anyway. Then they have a smooch. An awkward smooch. I don't know why they kiss like that. Guys, they're falling in love. They park up beside a lake in Missouri to camp out for the night and find out Lee's first time was a babysitter too. Oh my god, when you have things in common with babe. Maren asks if he'll listen to something with her, but before she can get the tape out, two guys drive up. They saw him down at the swimming hole. Upwind of him. You feel me? Bradley and Jake. Sorry, Brad.
Goddamn, my name is Brad, man.
Lee introduces them as Leon and Maggie, immediately telling the audience that no trust. Distrust these guys. We don't trust them, neither should you. Later that night, they're sitting around a campfire, drinking some beers, and Jake is telling the story of how he and Brad met. Although the story is obviously utterly insane, it's really just like a couple telling the story of how they met. They're finishing different parts of the story, just like they've told it 100 times. There's something so wonderful about this scene, because although we recognise Brad and Jake as a threatening presence, it is so easy to see it from a different angle. One of solidarity, camaraderie, even found family. These people don't know each other, but they know what they have in common. It's like the unity between members of marginalised communities when they are in the same room. Specifically the queer community, because that is, for the most part, something that you can hide from people. And that's the best comparison, I feel, because eaters look, quote-unquote, normal on the outside, but they have a heightened sense of smell and they can especially smell each other. So even if they're hidden from the rest of the world, cannibals can sense each other. It's gaydar. They don't know anything else about each other, but shared experiences and shared hardships are enough to form some sort of a bond. If only this was a different movie. Jake reveals that Brad is not an eater. He's just a policeman. It's interesting that being a creep who eats people and being an eater are clearly different things. Jake says he hasn't had his full bones yet, capital F, capital B, but I reckon that's coming soon.
When you eat the whole thing, bones and all.
The cultural impact of CinemaSins was mostly bad in my opinion, but I do love a good roll credits.
There's before bones and all, and then there's after.
Marin reacts to this with incredulity and, like, defensively. She says, "That's not possible. You can't eat bones, Jacob." Brad says, "Jake's teaching me how to smell other eaters." And Marin says, "No, he's not," and storms back to the truck. With her gone, Jake tells Lee he looks like every junkie he's ever met. He acts like he's got it all locked down, but he ain't. But maybe love will set him free. Insert evil cackle. In the night, while Jake and Brad are asleep, Lee and Marin very slowly, very, very quietly start the truck. It is incredibly tense. They drive away, very slowly. But just at the last second, Jake wakes up and starts to run towards the truck. Now, this movie isn't jump scary at all, which is great for me because I'm easily startled. But this shot of Jake running at the back of the truck makes my heart rate spike for sure. I don't think eaters are supernatural in any way, but this guy might be. We've made it to Iowa, baby! To an amusement park. To an amusement park. So much of this movie is like a coming-of-age rom-com. Two teens on a road trip, sneaking into a building, making out on a Ferris wheel. It's beautiful. But then, of course, Marin says she's hungry, so Lee goes off to find his girl some dinner. He approaches a milk can toss game with a cute little carny who lets him play for free. You see me, I see you. You see what I'm putting down with my mullet and your Mona Lisa shirt? This is the 80s. I know mullets were mainstream, but let me have this. It's the hair dye. He arranges to meet the guy when his shift ends at 11 o'clock. Back in the truck, Lee and Marin finish up the tape. Her dad tells her he hopes one day she gets cured, and she says, "I knew that was how it was going to end." Her dad had the best intentions, but it was a disappointing thing to hear. Marin asks what happened to Lee's dad, as he's never mentioned him, and he answers, evasively enough, just when the guy from the fair walks up. Lee grabs a knife and leads him into the cornfield. A real one. That wasn't like a metaphor. Lee kind of like bites his neck, and the guy's like, "Yo, you're freaky." No, Mona Lisa! Marin enters the cornfield just in time to see Lee do the knifing. He beckons her over, and the look she gives, oh my god. It's like her eyes just go dark. I replayed this part so many times just to see the way she goes from fascinated, maybe a bit wary, to just completely animalistic. In like a split second. Taylor Russell! So good! They go to the guy's house, just like Lee always does after he eats somebody, but the lights are on. Marin runs up to see who's home, and there's a woman rocking a baby. She rushes back to the car and opens the overhead compartment, and there are photos. Not everyone keeps their family pictures in their wallet, y'all. Lee says, "Hey, we didn't know," but Marin is fully hyperventilating. The wolves just realised the rabbits have a family. They flee the scene, but Marin tells him he should feel something. She doesn't know if she can do this forever, but he says, "How dare you make this harder?" Of course he feels things, but he's just been doing this for longer. He's learned to move on. What else can they do? He ate her up. Marin says, "Just drive." Girl, you're so spooky. They reach Minnesota and find Marin's grandmother, who tells her that her mother is no longer with us. Marin says, "What? When?" And Granny's like, "I don't want to talk about it." She says Janelle returned to Minnesota years ago, and now it makes sense why she'd seemed so bereaved. She'd left a child behind. She lets Marin see some photos and reveals that Janelle was adopted. Her biological parents abandoned her as a baby. Marin asks if, as a kid, she ever hurt anyone. And her grandmother says, "What sort of question is that?" Which is quite defensive, madam. Marin says, "I bet she did. I know she did." And she begs Mrs. Kearns to tell her more, to which she says, "Then ask her yourself!" So Janelle's not dead. She just checked herself into an institution. Marin rushes out of the house, back to Lee, who's waiting in the car, and they drive to Fergus Falls. The nurse tells Marin that it's been years since her mother was a danger. She's chill now. Although she is not doing well, her medication makes her unable to communicate, and the nurse says she might not even know who Marin is. Also, she ate her own arms. The nurse gives Marin a letter that her mum wrote nearly 15 years ago. It says, "If you're reading this, it means your dad broke his promise and told you something about me. And I'll know why."
He didn't know what I was when we married, but he figured it out by the time I had you. I promised I would never hurt either of you, but how could we be sure? It wasn't easy to leave. I loved you both so much.
Janelle only ever wanted love, but fear of herself convinced her that that is not attainable. She had to leave the family that she loved so much just because they couldn't be 100% sure that she would never hurt Marin or Frank. Janelle thinks people like them are better off dead. In fact, the only reason she's still alive is so that she could be there if Marin ever showed up. She then attacks her in some sort of twisted act of mercy. The other moment in this film, which could be called a jump scare if you're jumpy enough, which I am. Marin makes haste, and why did I write makes haste? Makes haste, and busts out of the infirmary and back to Lee, who's waiting outside. Marin is angry at her mother for abandoning her, because if she would have stayed, then she could have provided Marin with some sort of guidance. Marin says, "You know how different this would have been if I could have had one person on my side?" I love this argument that Marin and Lee have outside, because it's not even really an argument, and I can genuinely say that they are both right in their own ways. And I'm a sucker for when a man in a movie is not mean. All too often men are allowed to be mean in movies with very little repercussions, and I just like that Lee is a genuine guy. And Marin isn't mean to him either. She's hurt and she's confused, but she's never really mean to him, and I think that's why they feel like a real couple by this point in the movie. Lee makes the point that if Marin's mum had stayed, then there is a high chance that she could have hurt Marin. He also says it's better than what I went through, which... don't say that when someone is having a tough time. Marin swears that she will not be like her mother, and then immediately abandons the person she loves for fear of hurting them. Marin, come on, girl. We've all acted like our parents without realising it, but never with a jump cut that blunt. Lee realising that she's gone really hurts me, bro. Having the last interaction with your partner be an argument is just the worst.
Beautiful, beautiful brown eyes.
Sully turning up again was really the fourth jump scare of this film, and I was praying that he meant well, but it really bodes badly. Marin deduces that he's been following her the whole time, which is a terrifying revelation, but he never revealed himself because she was with a friend, and interrupting would be bad manners.
No, just a friend.
Oh, just a friend. Maybe he didn't get that telegram. Follow your nose or he follow his?
Both. Thanks for showing me how.
I love this man! I love this man! Why, Sully, why? Sully invites her again to ride along with him for a while. Their lives are lonely. There's no sense in making them lonelier. Marin tentatively says, "I'm a girl." And Sully says, "I know. About my daughter's age, if I had one." To which Marin replies, "Is that what this is?" I love Marin so much, and I think this is a very appropriate place to say that. I think she's smart, and she's not afraid to be blunt. She's not a people pleaser at all, which is a good thing. And she clearly sets boundaries when she needs to. You know that thing of when horror movie characters don't know they're in a horror movie? I think Marin knows. Unfortunately, Sully does not take kindly to this question, which is the moment I knew he had to be the villain. If there are any young girls watching this, I need you to know something. The men who respond defensively to questions like this are the ones you need to steer clear of. A really good man will understand why you're asking and will have no problem clarifying his intentions. Not all Sully though. No, Sully changes his vibe real quick upon being questioned. It's actually very hard to watch this scene. Apparently I can take buckets of blood, but one realistically dangerous man sends me over the edge. he yells at her. He really yells at her. It's horrible. Like, I know rejection hurts, but Sully could have been chill. So he drives away, erratically, but maybe this time you have an inkling that this is not the last we'll see of him. Maren goes to a little cafe. She takes her dad's tape out of her bag and holds it, looking out of the window at the police station across the street. This tape has all the evidence of every bad thing she's ever done. And then she very elegantly destroys it. Clearly she's made her choice. Now we return to Lee. He's getting some Z's in the truck in an empty car park, and he sees a dad with his kids walk past before falling asleep. We've had a few dreams in this movie before, and I just have to say I love the dream sequences. This particular one starts with a door opening, and at first you think that somebody is entering the truck until the shot pans out and you realise that it's just a disembodied sound. It really encapsulates the feeling of like how you might fall into a dream as you drop off to sleep. I love how layered the dreams are, with snapshots and jump cuts. It's really difficult to emulate dreams in movies because they are so unreal, but this film does a good job. We see Maren and Lee having a good fun time together. That sounds really weird. They're just jumping on a bed. They are genuinely having a good fun time together. We see Brad from earlier. We see Lee saying I love you outside the infirmary, which we know he didn't actually do because we were there. We see Lee beating someone to death. Throughout the entire sequence, we hear a man's muffled screams and sounds of struggling. Lee wakes up in a cold sweat and goes to a phone booth to call Kayla. Lee promises her that this time he's staying. Kayla sounds so happy, bro. She asks if she can tell Mom he's coming, and he says yes, which means he's really serious. A couple months have passed now, and Maren has turned up in Kentucky. She runs into Kayla outside an ice cream shop and asks where Lee is. Kayla says he lived with his aunt for a while, but their mum wouldn't leave him alone, so he moved out to the lake. Kayla suggests maybe he's been sticking around because he wondered if Maren would show up. Maren says, I don't know about that, but I know he was pretty anxious about getting back to you. And Kayla says, he really said that? Ah! She sits down on the hood next to Maren and says, I don't even know why Lee is so skittish. Like, I've told him no one even remembers all that stuff with the cops anymore. So Kayla tells Maren what happened 4 years ago. Their dad was a drunk. A violent one. The day he left, he hit Lee, and when Kayla tried to intervene, he hit her too, which is when Lee really lost it. He told Kayla to call the police, but their dad pulled the telephone out of the wall, so Lee told her to run into town. When she came back with the cops, Lee was covered in blood, but there was no sign of their dad. After Lee's name was cleared, everyone assumed he left town.
Dad's car was gone, and Lee told him that he took off, but there was blood on Lee. So they had to put him in a holding cell so they could test it. And for a minute there, everyone was like, Lee killed him, Lee killed him. But it was all Lee's blood. It was all bullshit, and they had to let him go. And that was 4 years ago. And he's been out of town for 3.5 of them. It's not fair. It's not fair.
Lee? Your tent. You should really use it. Just get lost.
Where do you want to go?
I don't know, anywhere. West. Let's go west.
So Maren and Lee are like a fish now.
Tell you what, you make me a good offer, I'll sell it to you right now.
You don't want to sell it out here.
Why?
Look around, man. How you gonna get home?
I don't know.
My home is wherever you are! Ah! Also, sidebar, I love the clothes in this movie. Maren and Lee both feel so authentic in the clothes they wear, and I love it. The dress Maren wears for most of the movie is so great. I love layers, I love floaty dresses with chunky boots, and I love clothes that feel like the characters really picked them out themselves. And Maren rocks a microbang.
We should get some new wheels as soon as we can.
I wish we could save it.
I'd rather have a van anyway.
I learned how to drive in that truck.
You learned how to kiss in that truck.
I knew how to kiss before you, Mr. Kentucky.
I sang to my girl in that truck.
His girl. I'm too romantic for this damn movie, and I'm struggling to summarize this scene because I just want to play you the whole thing. Maren tells Lee that Kayla told her what happened with their dad, and Lee says Kayla doesn't know what happened. After a little pressing from Maren, he reveals that their dad came for him. Bitey style. It was the first time Lee ever smelled it on somebody. It is genetic. Lee tells Maren how he knocked his dad out, drove him out to a barn, duct taped the hell out of him, and left him there for 3 days. The sound from Lee's dream. His scared father. Duct taped the hell up. And then Lee ate him. You abuse your kids, you get ate. Them's the rules. Lee worries that he is bad. He would have killed himself if it wasn't for Kayla. Lee asks if Maren thinks he's a bad person, and Maren says she loves him. Creepy Jake was right. Love will set you free. They decide to settle down. Be people for a while. Honestly, I would love to pretend that the movie ends here.
You want to be people? Let's be people.
Yeah. Let's be them for a while.
Maren returns from work one day to find their apartment empty. But she can feel that something is off. Sorry, pause. She looks so good. Oh my god. Anyway, Sully jump scare! He's broken into their apartment and he wants... I honestly think he might just want cuddles, but he is creepy. He's got a knife. He's spitting all over people. Guys, I'm so weird. I can see so much blood, but the minute there's some dribble, it's all the way over. Maren handles this situation so well. She stays incredibly calm, which I can imagine is very difficult, and she seems to be able to talk him down. Sully says the problem is how much Maren knows about him. And Maren says that she'd never tell anyone. Who would believe her anyway? Besides, Sully told her himself that he doesn't kill anyone. And Sully's like, that was kind of true. Kind of lies. I just wanted to be with someone who understood. That's what Sully says. I don't think his attachment to her is overtly sexual. He really just wanted to take a nap on her. I think this movie presents the idea that loneliness drives you mad. People need community, and there is nothing worse than being alone. Of course, not every character fits into this narrative. Brad and Jake have each other, and they are insane. But Sully does, and I do feel bad for him when he meets his end, despite how scary he is. Although he turned out to be the villain, his story could have been much different if he had had that person from the start. Just like Maren said, everything could have been different if he'd had someone on his side. Luckily, Lee returns home and sees Maren being pinned down by Sully. He creeps up behind him and puts the plastic shopping bag over his head. So now it's really going down. Sully swings. He stabs Lee. Now we're all on the floor. Sully's got Maren in a headlock. Lee's suffocating him. Maren struggles. The knife goes flying. She grabs it. We're stabbing Sully. Go crazy, go stupid. Now we've got him in the bathtub. He's bleeding out. I'm not sure I can describe this on YouTube, but we're in it now. We're wiggling around. She pulls his organs out. I can't tell which one, but that's what she does. Sully's dead now. But now we're faced with the next issue, which is that Lee is totes stabbed. Maren finds Sully's bag on the floor, and she pulls out the long braid with all his victims' hair. And the very last one is a blonde fishtail braid. And my heart just sank. Lee sees it and says, he got Kayla. And that is the moment he decides he can die. Because although he loves Maren in the end, Kayla was really the person he was living for. The snapshots of their apartment throughout this scene are just... The shot keeps cutting away to just stills of their apartment. Their normal human life covered in blood. They can never be normal. It will always catch up. As Lee slowly dies, he implores Marin to eat him. Bones and all, he says. It's beautiful. Marin is very much against this idea, at first refusing, but eventually she gives in. Just like Lee says, it's the easiest thing in the world. Just love me and eat. As the music kicks in and he slowly dies, she does. And it is beautiful. It's sweet and it's romantic. Why is that? Even as Lee is crying in pain because he's literally being eaten alive, it's like, wow, that's love right there. The next thing we see are shots of the apartment, all cleaned up and stripped bare, and then a long shot of Marin and Lee at the top of a hill together. And listen, the Wikipedia summary of the plot says revealing Lee to be alive, but I think that's totally wrong. This final shot is not revealing him to be alive. It's a memory. It's a dream, or at least dreamlike. And if you look closely at the clothes they're wearing, or not wearing, I think it's specifically that day in July when Lee told Marin what happened to his dad. Sorry Wikipedia, but you read this wrong. And that's the movie. But we're not done yet because I promised I would tell you about the differences between the film and the book. I read this book for you, okay? I really wanted a physical copy of this book to just like hold and flip through while I recorded this segment. But I couldn't find one anywhere, and my impatience to film this video was stronger than my desire to have a physical copy, so imagine. Considering how visual this movie is, I was really interested to see how they translated that from the page. So Marin is 16 years old, not 18, and it's her mum who raised her, not her dad. It's just swapped over. It's also set in 1998. So a bit later than the movie. It's written in first person, which I expected, and the story starts straight away with the story of Marin eating her babysitter, and then she talks about her 16th birthday. Marin's mum just leaves a note, not a tape. It just says, "I'm your mother, but I can't do this anymore," and Marin sort of like deduces everything else that Frank says in the film. The decision to make it a long tape in the film makes a lot of sense. It's better for the format, it's a good way of explaining Marin's past to the audience, and it's so atmospheric, so I'm glad that they did that. Then she tells the story of when she ate the boy at camp, which was really interesting for me because in the movie it's just sort of like a throwaway line, and I felt like I was unlocking secret backstory. I'm not always the biggest fan of first person, but it is interesting to see Marin's perspective. While 8-year-old Marin is struggling to resist the urge to eat Luke at camp, she says his eagerness, his spirit, his thirst for the outdoors, all that had a smell too. Like wet leaves and salty skin and hot cocoa in a tin cup that knew the shape of his hands. After Marin's mother runs away, Marin follows her to her grandparents' house, where she guesses that she's gone. However, she doesn't actually speak to her mother, she just watches them through a window and then decides against it. So now she's sort of stranded because her mother gave her 100 quid to find her dad, and then she used most of it to chase her mother. So she's looking for food, so she goes to a grocery store, and that's where she finds Mrs. Harmon, the old lady that Sully finds in the film. Mrs. Harmon says she needs help carrying her groceries, so Marin ends up back at her house. For a while she thinks this is the perfect situation, but of course, since I watched the film first, I knew that Mrs. Harmon will not be making out of this chapter. She actually dies peacefully in her sleep, tucked up on the sofa, which is honestly the nicest end anyone comes to in this book, and Marin finds Sully eating her later. Sully and Marin talk for a long time, basically the same conversation as in the book, except that Sully is just cooking the entire time because he's this crazy guy with an unquenchable appetite. Sully warns Marin against looking for her dad and invites her to go along with him, and she says she'll think about it, but he's the one who leaves after that. In the morning I found another note on the kitchen table, but this one made me smile. Missy, I got a feeling you won't take my advice to heart about not looking for your daddy. But if you change your mind, just come back to town and wait somewhere for me and I'll find you. Life with old Sully is never dully. Sullivan. P.S. Picked this up in my travels and I thought you might like to have it. and he leaves her like a little flip book. Sully in this book is who I wish he'd been in the movie, at least at this point. Marin finds herself in a Walmart after being abandoned by the person giving her a lift, and that's where she meets Lee, in the same fashion as in the book, where he saves a woman from being harassed by a man, although in the book the man is dressed in boxer shorts, cowboy boots, a wife beater and a Stetson, for some reason. Between meeting Lee and going with him, she has this whole thing with a Walmart employee called Andy. Obviously there are a lot more events in the book because movies often cut a lot down to fit them into a couple of hours. If you want me to make a full-length book review, then put it down in the comment section below. Smash that like, etc. It would be interesting to review the book like as its own thing without comparing it to the movie. Anyway, the Walmart employee tries to sexually assault her and she eats him. You know what I'm gonna say. You hurt women, you get ate. Them's the rules. Marin tries to end it by standing in the road, but Lee pulls her out of the way of an oncoming truck, saving her life. He is 19 and she is 16, so at this point I was getting worried, but I digress. They go back to the house of the guy whom Lee ate, just like they do in the film, and leave in the morning when the mother of Barry's child turns up demanding child support. She slashes one of the truck tyres, but Lee changes it when she leaves, and then they're off again. Oh, water! I really need to stop filming long videos where I just don't drink any water, just talking for like 2 hours straight. Once the waitress had brought our mugs, I began to tell him about Mrs. Harmon, how I'd met her at the supermarket and helped her with her groceries, and how she'd fed me and promised to teach me how to knit. I told him about going for a nap, getting up again and finding her, you know, and then getting up again and seeing Sully bent over her. I was very careful with the words I used. I never forgot we were in public. I just find that funny because in the film she's just like, he keeps a braid from all the people he eats! No regard for who might hear. Sully turns up again when Marin and Lee reach the fun fair. Marin seems genuinely happy to see him, but Lee is sceptical. What a coincidence, Lee said as he shook Sully's hand. Marin told me she met you all the way back in Pennsylvania. Sully shrugged. Only so many roads you could take, and I was coming this way anyhow. Lee crossed his arms and shifted from foot to foot. Oh, really? Sully offers them a place at his cabin to stay for the night, and Lee says, okay, thanks, just to get him to go away. Marin trusts Sully to some extent, but Lee does not. Lee wins the lucky toss, just like in the film, but he does it to win the toy for a little boy, not to eat the carny, who's a woman, not a man with a Mona Lisa shirt. Never mind, he actually does eat her in the end. Also, Marin says she looks about 16, so Lee clearly has a type. Sully turns up and quite kindly distracts Marin while Lee eats the girl from the carnival. Lee comes out and they drive to Sully's cabin. Marin's feeling a little weird because Lee, flirted with the carnival woman and kissed her before murdering her. For a while we sat in silence and I tried to pick apart this feeling I was having. How could I be jealous of loathsome Lauren, the Lucky Toss girl? Sully makes them dinner at his cabin and it's all very lovely even though Lee is still suspicious. It's a nice moment. In the morning, Sully's gone and he's left another note saying, help yourself to breakfast. I felt Lee reading over my shoulder. Why is he always calling you Missy? I smiled. It's short for Marin. Again, he shot me a look. No, it's not. Yeah, no, it's not. He's right, it's not. So they successfully reach Minnesota and Marin finds her dad's mum, and the conversation goes the same way as in the movie. Frank's been institutionalised for some time. One difference is that the Yearleys had a son before Frank called Tom, who died at the age of 3, and they adopted Frank basically to try to replace him. And it meant that they never really loved Frank that much, because low-key it didn't work. Lee and Marin break into a model home in one of those new neighbourhoods and play house for a while, and Lee tells Marin why he had to leave town. Lee and Kayla had different dads, and they never knew either of them, so it's not that. Lee had this girlfriend called Rachel, and she was at his house with Kayla, and his mum's boyfriend comes home and starts being drunk and crazy. So Lee tells Kayla and Rachel to stay in Kayla's room and lock the door, but Rachel doesn't listen and sees him in the middle of eating his mum's boyfriend. She is not so chill about it. It literally drove her crazy. Rachel got institutionalised. The next morning, Lee is being cold. They drive to the hospital where her dad is, and Marin's like, well, I guess this is it, because she doesn't want to get hurt. And then he gets mad because he's low-key sad too, and she storms off, and he drives away. Communication, guys, damn. The hospital visit goes very much the same as in the film. Her father can't speak, but he wrote her a letter when he first arrived in a notebook. He had no idea that Marin might be like him, though. He does mention that Sully used to watch him when he was at school? ? He doesn't actually say Sully, but he says a man in a red flannel shirt, and that's how Marin described him earlier in the book, so we're supposed to know that it's him. Mostly he was jealous of Tom, who the Yearleys would always mention and compare him to, and he could tell that he was just a replacement, and it ate him up. The letter is long as hell. Obviously, it's written in a notebook, so it's written across multiple days. She basically just reads this whole notebook. He tells her how he met her mum. He tells her about the first time he ate somebody. He ate his kidnapper. Bones and all. At the age of 3! As the notebook goes on, the writing gets less coherent until he's just writing her mother's name over and over again. It's actually very moving, to be honest. He did eat one of his hands, so that's the same. The orderly, called Travis, tells Marin that the doctor has phoned CPS and offers to make her dinner, and they'll figure out what to do next, because, might I remind you, Marin is only 16 in the book, so she could be taken into foster care. Travis is like a genuinely lovely man, except that he confesses to Marin that he knows she's an eater, simply because he guessed that it was probably genetic, and that's the reason Frank ate his own hand. Because Travis suggested his child might be like him. And it was sad. Travis became obsessed with eaters. Because he knew there was no way Frank could be the only one. He literally started seeking them out. I don't get it, I said after a pause. You actually went looking for people like us? He shrugged. I was fascinated. Anybody would be. I wanted to know how it was possible for some perfectly normal-looking person, a person like you, to gobble someone up just like you were an ogre in a fairy story. I still haven't seen it, but I know it's possible. I know it's real. But weren't you afraid you'd be... I left the question dangling, and Travis sighed. There was no need to be afraid. For the first time, there was an unpleasant look on his face. Nobody wanted me. At this point in the story, this man upsets me the same way that Book Hagrid upsets me. Like, you are so lovely, but don't trauma dump on children. He reached for my hand. No. I stood up again and inched away. No, no, no. Please don't take me the wrong way. I'm not trying to take advantage of you. Honest. He drew a slow, deliberate breath. I don't even care for women in that way. Guys, it's okay, he's gay. So he's like, I need to ask you something. And she's like, no, no, no. And he's like, please, I need this. And she's like, I got to go. So he drives her to Sully's cabin. And then in the car, she's like, it was a long drive to Sully's cabin. But Travis didn't complain. I nodded off in the car, and when I woke up, I felt relieved I hadn't had to pretend. How could we have a normal conversation after what he'd asked of me? What am I missing? What did he ask? What? I don't understand. I'm supposed to understand the subtext, and I don't. Did he want her to eat him? Did he want her to eat him? Sully isn't home when they get to the cabin, so Travis says he'll wait, and he's being really touchy and he keeps hinting at something, and I still don't understand what he wants her to do. So she finally forces Travis to leave, and I still don't fully know what he wanted. Like, I'm pretty sure that he is one of those weird people that wants to be eaten. Sully doesn't come back for a really long time, so she goes snooping through the cabin and finds tons upon tons of items that Sully has supposedly taken from people. Among them, she finds her father's ID card from when he was a park ranger. Just then, Sully comes back. They talk for a little while, but it's like weird now because she knows that he has her dad's ID card. Marin goes to bed and dreams of Mrs. Harmon, who tells her Sully isn't a very nice man. Marin says, I'm like him, and Mrs. Harmon says, no dear, you're not. When she wakes up, Sully is creepily watching her sleep, and he says, I see you found the ID card. She asks why he has it, and this man says, oh, he's my son. He's my son. Granddad Sully! She's like, what? Because he said it so casually. He attacks her because he hates his son or something. I think that's why. And if I can't get to him, I'll eat you instead. So, Maren's grandmother ran off with Frank, took Frank away from Sully, and then he just got kidnapped randomly. So, he's mad at the mother of his child. He wants to eat Maren for some reason. So maybe Sully isn't the chillest guy in the world after all. My bad for getting my hopes up, I guess. Damn. Maren fights him off and runs. And while walking down the road, she finds Travis's abandoned car. Lights still on, keys still in the ignition. No Trav. I guess Travis killed himself? It's implied. She goes to his house to get herself cleaned up and then takes his car and drives to find Lee. Lee taught her to drive earlier in the book. She phones Kayla from the high school directory because she doesn't actually know Lee's last name, and Kayla tells her that Lee actually hasn't been home, but to meet her after her shift at the ice cream parlour. When they get there, Maren gives Kayla Travis his car because earlier in the story Lee had said he wished he had enough money to buy her one. I love Kayla. I am very happy she survives this version of the story. Wait, Kayla and Maren are probably like the same age in this version. Ooh, Maren, you chose the wrong sibling. This water tastes like plastic. Maren stays the night with Kayla as their mother is absent. After that, Maren goes back to Wisconsin to stay close to her father. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in weeks, I felt no anxiety. Being with Kayla had made me feel better about a lot of things. If I never saw Lee again, it was all the better for him. Travis had gotten what he'd asked for, and if Sully wanted to finish me off, then let him come. I would be ready. Travis had gotten what he'd asked for. Travis had gotten what he'd asked for. Sully ate him! So Maren lives in a barn for a few weeks and then returns to the infirmary where her father is and finds Lee waiting for her in the car park, which he says he's been doing every day for weeks. He is lovely. Still 19 though, and they join forces again. The truck eventually breaks down, so they hitchhike with a girl called Carrie Ann, who's a bitch to Maren because she thinks Lee's hot. They stay overnight in her uni dorm, but she makes Maren sleep in the common room, and then Maren gets kicked out because she doesn't even go there. Lee finds her nearby and tells her she can go and get her back herself because now everything in that room belongs to you. I'm not sure how that works, but okay. I have to say, I'm getting slightly bored of the way they eat people at the drop of a hat. I know for Lee it's like an uncontrollable thing when someone is bad, but I feel like the gravity of eating somebody gets less and less when you're just doing it left and right. So now Maren has basically taken Carrie Ann's life. She's using her ID card to get into the student library and she just sort of goes there all the time. She's living in Carrie Ann's dorm room. I'm honestly not sure why there were no repercussions for eating this student, but I guess we ball. Maren deserved a win. But not for long, because Sully finds her again, but not before murdering Mrs. Harmon's cat, for God's sake. Leave Puss out of this. That's his real name. Sully locks them in her room and claims he ate Lee, but that's a lie. I don't know why Maren knows this, but she does, and a few minutes later he arrives and eats Sully. In 7 minutes! How do you do that? So then Maren and Lee drink a little whiskey, get into bed for sleepy time, and she eats him. Reader, she eats him in, give or take, 6 words. Off screen, no less. She eats him because Maren's thing is that she eats boys who are attracted to her. I think she's meant to be eating boys she's attracted to, but it doesn't ever quite read like that. So when Lee got into bed with her and said nice things and gave her a little smooch, it was go time. When he held me, everything had melted away. Everything dark and ugly and rotten inside of me. Lee had made me pure. He'd let me do it. But I lay in bed for a long time, wishing with all my heart that he hadn't. Camille, I have questions. Number one, what's going on? At this point, I had absolutely no idea how this book was going to end. Marin gets a job in the uni library because she's already been busying herself with stacking shelves, and finally someone notices and is like, hey, you could be getting paid for that. And she also gets a little apartment off campus because continuing to live in a dead girl's dorm is just not a sustainable arrangement. So, we've reached the final scene of the book. There's this guy who's been flirting with her for a while, I think she's been flirting back, called Jason, and one day they go to the back of the library together. I'm gonna try and get through this scene. I only took off my blouse to keep it clean, I said. He grinned. Then you may as well take off your skirt. God give me strength. I shook my head and took a step backwards, just out of reach. Do you know what the Dewey Decimal number is for cannibalism, Jason? It's 391.9. Facts. Facts. I take such comfort in facts. Want me to tell you why I know that? Are you going to devour me, little Miss Bookworm? I took a step backwards. Demonology, 133. Tell me more, Jason whispered. Are you a succubus, Marin? If you don't leave, right now, I will eat you. Throat first, then the rest of you. Jason's eyes shone in the gloom of the stacks. He stepped into me and ran his tongue along the edge of my jaw. I had no idea you were so twisted. I sighed as I pressed my lips to his neck. Nobody ever does. The end. I can't lie, and don't laugh. She ate that. This section was genuinely supposed to be like a quick rundown of the differences between the book and the movie, but the book turned out to be so wildly different that I just had to go through the whole thing. I think I prefer the movie, but again, it's so different that I did start to see it as its own, like, separate entity. Some small changes that weren't so obvious. No one eats anyone together. I don't know if you'd noticed, but I thought it was interesting. In the movie, eating somebody with somebody else sort of feels like a bonding activity, but that never happens in the book. It's sort of like a personal thing, I think. It didn't feel so much like horror. It felt like YA and a little bit Wattpad-y at times. Every time someone was about to get eaten, there was like a tasteful cutaway. The only really explicit moment was when Marin walks in on Sully eating Mrs. Harmon. That's described quite explicitly. Obviously, it's not necessarily bad for something to feel YA-ish or Wattpad-y, but it definitely has a certain vibe, a very different one from the film. Marin is also quite a Wattpad protagonist. Girls never wanted to be friends with her because she was weird. Not because she eats people, but because she doesn't wear makeup and she only wears black. She has blue eyes and straight brown hair. She says to us, the audience, that Kayla is pretty, but she's wearing too much makeup. And she says to Carrie Ann's face, "You have a lot of makeup." She laughed. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "I don't know what you need it all for. You're already pretty." She didn't thank me for the compliment. Carrie Ann then tells Marin that she would be prettier if she actually put in some effort, and then, if you remember, she very quickly gets her comeuppance in the form of literally being cannibalised. It's very strange that Marin feels like more of a complete person in the film, because it should be the other way around. Like, in the book, we're in Marin's head. We see the story through her eyes, so naturally she should feel like more of a whole person. But no. I just feel more connected to movie Marin. I think that might just be a credit to Taylor Russell, though. Marin and Lee aren't really romantic until the end. Marin has a crush on him the whole time, but he never really seems to like her in that way until the very end, when he tells her he does in not so many words, and then lets her eat him for no apparent reason. Marin and Lee also bicker a lot more. They seem to clash more and just overall seem more unhealthy and less well suited to each other. The book implies that eaters are definitely supernatural in some way, while I never get that from the film. Marin's dad says he was able to grind bones down to nothing with his little milk teeth. Like, there was no evidence of that man left after that 3-year-old was done with him. It's an ability they have, rather than, you know, like a disorder. I guess that's hinted at in the film, but it's pretty clear in the book. The author literally calls them ghouls. It's very straight. in that both the fact that everyone is straight and just like the energy of the book. Like I said, it gets sort of boring how often they eat people. It does take away the gravity of what they're doing, and I feel like that's counterproductive in a book that is meant to make you think about eating meat. It is meant to be a commentary on the meat industry, like I said, but I don't really know. I found an interview with Responsible Eating and Living where Camille DeAngelis basically like lays it out pretty clearly. She says, "The point of the book is that flesh is not food. It's not. It's not food. A lot of people eat it. It is what we have been indoctrinated to believe is food after thousands of years we've been eating it. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it ethical. That doesn't make it fair to the animals and to the planet." So that's pretty cut and dry. When I called her ironically vegan at the start of this video, yeah, that's her point. And I'm not really here to give my opinion on that. Camille DeAngelis wants us to look at ourselves as predators, to realise that eating any sort of flesh is just as crazy as eating humans. If that was the case, why did Marin end the book as such a slay? I love her. And I do support women's wrongs. I know every time I say a phrase like that, I am dating this video. I liked this book. I think I did. But for completely different reasons than the film, and not for the reasons that Camille intended. It would be interesting to see a more faithful adaptation. I only had to watch Bones and All once for it to become one of my favourite films, and I very much enjoyed watching it again for this video. My friend recommended it to me by saying it was the most unnerving, sweet and odd movie ever, featuring toxic bisexuality behaviour. I was immediately sold, and she was 100% correct. This movie is so sweet and romantic, while somehow also being about a very creepy, scary, ooky and spooky topic. I honestly feel that it's about community. Having a part of yourself that society rejects and being scared of it yourself. It's about otherness. Visuals, 10 out of 10, beautiful. Sound design, 10 out of 10. The E.T. noises are never even too cringy. Even the finger bite at the start, visceral as it is, it's not unbearable. Acting, 10 out of 10. The leads give a wonderful and believable performance, as do all the supporting cast. Music, 10 out of 10. Moving. Overall, 10 out of 10, if you couldn't tell. I think I need to watch more movies. I love movies. I love movies. If you'd like to see me do more videos like this, please give this video a big thumbs up or a little thumbs up, depending on the size of your thumbs. Or comment down below any movie recommendations for me. I hate jump scares, but I love some creepy. Go crazy. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. If you've made it to the end, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Bye! They were in Virginia, and now they're in Maryland. Maryland. Don't be British. They're in Maryland! Damn! This script is hard to read! Why did I write something so hard to read?